Good evening. Welcome to Dweezil Zappa's audio documentaries. How are you doing tonight, Dweezil?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's back again. We're gonna do another album. We're gonna do Automatic tonight. Out in
Perfect.
2000, I believe. That's there about the time period. If you remember that.
You would probably know better than me, probably consulting the
The
interwebs
interwebs.
and whatnot. I don't remember exactly when it came out. I was working on it in the 90s. It was a collection of different songs, and I had just gotten the studio up and running that was inside the Utility Muffin Research Kitchen. It was in the vocal booth at the Utility Muffin Research Kitchen. I had a bunch of D88s and a little console and a couple of outboard pieces of gear, no computers. And that's what I was using to make that record at that time.
It's a really interesting album because it's got a lot of instrumentals and you can break down like it's the song choices too. A lot different than what you had been doing. You know.
Yeah, well, I hadn't made a record in a while up until that record. And I had done a little bit of touring previously before that record. But then I had actually had a long time kind of sitting there not making much music. And there was a period of time in the 90s where I just was noticing that if you had musical skill, especially on the guitar,
Mhm.
it wasn't appreciated. It was kind of like the worse you were, the better the musician people thought you were. They thought you were being more creative because you were trying to bend the rules or do something that, you know, because you couldn't do it and you were just barely able to do it, it was more cool or punk or grunge or whatever that was. So there was a period of time where I was like, why bother even playing guitar anymore? So that record kind of got me into playing guitar a little bit more, but it had a bunch of things that were from different time periods that ended up on the record. And there were a couple of experiments where I was doing some transcriptions of some music and making things happen on the guitar that was just completely only guitar and nothing else except for maybe the drums. So Hawaii Five-O or the
Yeah.
Grinch or the classical pieces, the Les Toreadors and stuff like that. That was like the stuff from the Bad News Bears that I loved, you know, because growing up, before I was into guitar, I was into baseball, and the Bad News Bears was my all-time favorite movie at that time. It was so cool. So, you know, there's just all these little connections with the music.
My favorite part has got to be track 11. It's going to be Dick Simmons' office, but we can tell it down. I first heard it, I was like, what? Well, we'll get back to it, but anyway,
Yeah.
It's hilarious. All right, so let's break it down. Let's
Sure.
go right off number one.
So the first track, Flax-tention, is an extension of a song called Flack, which was on Confessions. So at one point when I was making the Confessions record, the song Flack had no name. And we always knew how to say which song we wanted to play because the song started with the snare drum, Flack, boom, dang. So the Flack was the name of that song. And anything that kind of related to that song was always had the name Flack in the title. So I did, when I made the Confessions album, there was an intro that was added on to Flack. That was this tapping kind of intro thing with this sample and hold kind of sound that was made from this Zoom box, that this little amplifier thing that used to go onto a guitar strap. It was a tiny little amp. And so that was something added on in the studio. But then I took that same idea and I kept developing it into a bigger piece of music. So at a certain point, when we had done some live concert performances, the intro to the song Flack became this other piece, which is called Flax-tention. So that used to be the thing that got us all the way into the song Flack. So it's a convoluted story, but it's all related to that one song, which started just with a snare hit.
That's pretty funny.
That song is probably the most complex two-handed tapping thing that I had ever done, because it incorporates a lot of tapping for chords. It's done in an open E tuning. So there's a lot of things that happen with multiple fingers on the right hand, and I'm playing chords and I'm doing these pull-offs and open string things. But then there are all these extra parts that are syncopated things that go along with the drums. So there's really specific runs that are orchestrated so that the guitar and the drums are playing the same rhythms. And then on top of that, there's now counterpoint issues or things that happen where I put in, I put these counterpoint things together in the composition where there's structure that's happening with the main guitar riff, but I wanted even more stuff to kind of cross and go in different directions. And that piece is probably one of the most complex compositions that I've ever written. And now I actually don't even have any idea how to play it. I did a version of it on an acoustic guitar that actually came out, and it has some slightly different parts, but it came out on the record that I did, which was a guitar solo collection, the most recent version of Live in the Moment. Mm-hmm. So there's an acoustic version of that, which I had done live at a radio station in Holland. And so this is a very strange piece of music, which has been done a few different ways. But if I had to sit down and learn it, I would have a really hard time, because I don't remember. And a lot of these like two-hand technique things, I don't really do anymore. So it's a crazy piece of music, but I really liked the drum fills that Terry Bozzio did at the end. There's some really cool fills that lead up into, you know, the big final finale of the thing. And I was always really curious about how he could figure out how to fill those spaces the way that he did. And I had at one point wanted to try to transcribe what those rhythms were and try to put notes to those fills so I could create my own language in my guitar playing that would then be reminiscent of the way that Terry could group all those things. Because when you watch him play, he's so dynamic. There's all the stuff that's up here with the cymbals, and he's up and down. And so the idea of the textural changes of the rhythms is really interesting from a guitar perspective, to try to get that, okay, low notes, high notes, and get the rhythm to feel like it's doing the same thing that the drums would be doing, and not necessarily creating a melody. Sometimes you want repeated notes. So you're having something that's more what a drum kit would sound like, and not a scale that's doing this kind of stuff. I never got around to exactly doing that, but that's still a concept that I want to work on, with getting some of those rhythms and repeated notes.
I'm just laughing at the list of things for you to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are on my list that I never seem to have enough time for.
Your list gives me anxiety.
Me too.
Oh, man. All right. It is great. I want to say, even so, that song and the rest of the songs, so there's certain guitars you use for that album. Was there a couple
that
in your
particular
arsenal?
song, I used the green Charvel that was on Having a Bad Day. Okay. And it was tuned up to an open E chord at that time. And I would just leave it tuned that way and use it on tour for that song and a couple of other little things that ended up with that open tuning. So the song Kids Cereal had an open E tuning. The song Rubber Band, which I ended up playing on a fretless guitar, had an open E tuning. So I was doing some stuff with open tunings, well, specifically an open E tuning at that time. So it kind of made its way through a couple different things. There was even one other song. I can't even remember the name of it. It was on one version of Shampoo Horn where it was, I think we called it I Wants Me Gold. It was like a Leprechaun song.
There's some pretty funny stuff on those. I haven't delved into those as much as I would have liked to. Which is great. You also have, what about amps? Did you stick with any certain type of amps or pedals throughout this thing? Because it does feel like a lot of different sounds and tones on this album compared to your past ones. Like it's
there's different things going on that one that used part of my old live rig at the time, which had a classic 100 Peavey head and a 5150 head, which was also another 100-watt amp, but the classic 100 Peavey was more kind of like a Marshall, and the 5150 had more gain. It was different than the Marshall sound. It was the new kind of Van Halen sound at that time. But I would use a combination of both, and you'll hear an Eventide harmonizer doing some things that kind of change the pitch and delays and stuff. And I would use a ring that was on my pinky finger and scrape it over the strings. So you hear these weird chirpy sounds that get delayed, and the pitch changes a little bit. And that's from the Eventide.
Now that was from Automatic, or which one?
That was on the intro for Flax-tention on Automatic. And
okay.
So, but over the years, I've used so many different pieces of equipment. A lot of the stuff that's on Automatic is things that were simple to set up in the studio, not necessarily like the big guitar rig. So sometimes I might just use a single amp. Or I even had this thing that was made by Lexicon at that time, which was a little, I think it was a 10-watt rack-mounted amplifier that went with this other digital effects processor. So it was kind of the precursor to what the Fractal box became. But this had an analog little amp in it as a rack mount amp. So I did some guitar sounds with that. And I also did some direct recording where I just plugged pedals right into the console and did some weird distortion and other stuff. I was just always trying stuff out at that time. So
I think that's one of the funnest parts of this album to me, is there's a lot of different guitar sounds on it. And they're all different tones, but they're also very clean. So it's really kind of fun how they all stand out totally different.
Yeah, it definitely was mostly amps that were mic'd up, but on things like Hawaii 5.0 and the Grinch, that's where some of that Lexicon thing started to come into play, just because I was trying to move from part to part quickly, and it was just easier to have that be something that I could tweak that was right in front of me in the control room, because I had this other thing that was an Orban parametric EQ, and I would drastically shape the sound with that EQ for all of those things that you hear where it's like an orchestral arrangement of guitar. It's kind of like a Brian May style orchestra on guitar. And I don't even remember what was the main guitar at that time. Sometimes I might have even used a Brian May model guitar for some stuff. But at that time I was using a bunch of different guitars. I had an Ibanez Iceman that had cream P90 pickups, and it was a gold sparkle Iceman guitar. I used that a lot on some stuff, but there were a few different guitars. I didn't really have too much stuff that had any kind of vibrato bar stuff at that time, and I hadn't switched to SGs yet.
The next song, Automatic, I really love the sound of that. It's like one of my favorite songs on the album. And actually, as you know, I've used that and stuff for you as it is.
Yeah. So the opening sound is a preset that I made inside this TC Electronics rack unit box. And it basically had this pulsating rhythm sound. It's like a tremolo, but it also had kind of a envelope filter. And so I would strum a chord, and then it would do that kind of sound. And then I just would move the chord, and it would kind of just move that tremolo kind of sound. But then I also had a guitar that had a Sustainiac, so I could have notes that would hold. But it was that guitar was a Fernandez guitar that was also fretless with a Sustainiac. So you hear things that sound like a slide guitar, but it's actually a fretless guitar with a Sustainiac sustaining the note as I move it. And sometimes I would have the notes so they're just a full step apart and they're beating against each other. So that you hear that happen on that song a few times. But the main guitar sound for the solo, the first solo, if I recall correctly, is kind of more of a cleaner sound. Mm-hmm. And it was with my guitar rig. I had this ADA multi-effects processor that was from the late 70s. And one of the things was this, you could choose flanger, phaser, delay, or reverb, maybe. I can't remember what the fourth one was. But the delay, I would set it to be about 30 or 40 milliseconds. Mm-hmm. So it was a pretty wide spread. And there was, when you heard the clean sound, the part that's on the right is delayed pretty heavily against the part that's on the left. So it has a really strange character to it, but it worked well for that song.
I love the solos on that. It's like some of my favorite solos are on that song.
Oh, cool. Yours. And my friend Blues also played on that, and he was playing with the octave pedal for some of the sounds that he played. But the fuzz tone sound was an original fuzz face. It was one that went all the way back to when my dad was using fuzz faces in the 60s. So that was a Dallas Arbiter fuzz face.
In fact, you can remember things so well. So succinct is incredible.
Yeah, I barely have even thought about this record, but this stuff is coming back as we're talking about it.
I love that. It's hilarious. Fretless. You don't usually do much fretless work,
Well, I have over the years. I've snuck it into stuff. So I love the sound of fretless guitar, but it's really hard to play in tune. So certain things about playing a fretless guitar is you have to imagine that to get it to be in tune, there's fret lines. Okay, so this is the fret. Normally, you have a space between the two frets, and that's where your fingers go when you're playing. But with a fretless guitar, for the note to actually be in tune, you have to make your finger go to that fret line. And so it's really, you got to use your ear until it sounds like it's in tune. But if there's any kind of stuff on the neck that causes too much friction and slows your finger down, or doesn't allow you to get to where you need to go, or it stops you and then you get there but you overshoot it, so the neck has to be slippery enough so that you can vibrato and be in that space. And it's really hard to get a neck to operate the way that you want, because it always has some resistance somewhere. And the fret or the string has to be close enough to the neck that you don't have to push down too hard, because that will also stop you from moving. So it's a tricky thing. But when you have a Sustainiac, it's a little easier, because you can hear this constant sustained note, and then you can hear it approaching. And if you go too high, you can go back, and then you can vibrato the thing. So it really is a tricky instrument, but I love the sound of it with a Sustainiac, because then you can make it sound like a slide, but it's different. You can do different kind of phrasing, because you can use all your fingers and not have to just use one thing that you just move around from fret to fret. So I, over the years, have used it in different ways for different overdubs, but I have different songs that are completely fretless, like the song that we were just talking about a minute ago that's on Shampoo horn called Rubber Band. That's a totally fretless guitar, but it doesn't have a Sustainiac in it. But then on Via Zamata, the song Truth, that's a fretless guitar playing the melody and the solo. So the whole tune is fretless guitar, but there's an orchestra and there's other things going on with that as well. So I've been experimenting with it for a long time. I even had some of it in the song Dinosaur, which is that crazy piece that has all those guitar players on it.
Well, from the outside, until we've had this discussion with these albums, a lot of us aren't aware that you've been doing it, because it's usually on stage or live stuff people see you play, and it's not something you're usually pulling out the fretless live. No,
I mean, I did have a guitar that I set up that was half fretless, where it was just the top strings were fretless and the low strings were fretted. And to my knowledge, nobody had ever done that before. And I had a guitar custom built to do that a few years ago, and I started playing with it. And I even had to have a custom bridge made, which I've only recently put on to help try to intonate it. Because the thing is, like I was talking about before, if you want to play a note in tune, you have to play it on the line. But what if you're trying to play a chord and you have to have one finger in the middle and then the other two fingers closer to the line? Now this note is going to be out of tune while these might be in tune. So if you can adjust the intonation on a bridge by making it move towards the nut, now you might be able to get this note to be in tune when your finger is where it needs to be, but it's a whole other thing. Now the guitar is going to be even trickier to play because some notes will be right when they're in the middle and some notes will be right when they're on the line. So that's a
That is
whole other
insane.
world.
It's like the guitar is too easy for you. You have to keep inventing guitars that make it harder for you.
Well,
This isn't hard enough.
Easy. It's not easy, but I do like a challenge.
I know. It's very interesting. It is very interesting. So we were talking, so Hawaii 5.0, it actually, the guitar sound, I know you made it sound like it was a very simple setup. It sounds pretty spot on to the Hawaii 5.0, even a little better because it sounds like it's like, energied up compared to the original.
Well, the thing about that one, that was the first time I tried to do that experiment where I thought to myself, okay, let me see if I could transcribe note for note all the parts that are on the original, but do it only with guitar except for the drums. So even the low parts that are like the bass parts, I'm using a guitar, but I have an octave pedal on it to make it sound like a bass.
Okay.
So I was like, how far can I go with just the guitar? And to try to get the sounds that make it sound like the record, or the instruments that were used on the record, I had to use that Orban parametric EQ pretty drastically to filter and get really thin nasally tones to sound like horns or sound like strings or sound like, there's one part where it's trying to sound like low brass, like a tuba and some other stuff. And I used an octave pedal, a low octave pedal for that and some distortion. And so I thought it was pretty close to sounding like what the recording sounds like, considering it's all guitars.
It sounds really close. But to reference that, did you actually just do everything you heard the song and then you just said, I know the gear and I think I can tweak it on this way? Like,
so I essentially just played to the original. I was like, all right, let me hear this. And like tracing paper, I would be playing along and I would get like one part at a time that I was transcribing. And then I would check it against the original and be like, oh, it sounds pretty good, So it was, if you started both at the same time and A-B'd them, they'd be pretty close. But that's kind of how I did that.
In regards to that song and the overall songs you picked for this album, was there an ongoing thought process or just the songs that you were doing at the time?
They were just songs I was doing at the time because I probably had another 10 or 15 other ones that just didn't get finished, so they couldn't be in the running. I had a bunch of songs with vocals too, but I just ended up focusing on the instrumental stuff.
Because it feels like these songs could actually all be on soundtracks.
I started at that time doing music for music libraries, and I had been doing some music for some TV shows. So at that time, I was thinking of getting more into doing film scores, film and television music. And that's what I was kind of learning about and working on and learning about how to record and do that kind of stuff. So the little studio I put together was really the training ground for learning more about becoming a proper recording engineer, but then also thinking, how can I expand beyond just playing the guitar? Because I can't really play keyboards. I don't really play anything but the guitar. But if you're going to do film scores, you have to have at least some idea how to program some other things. And then it became a whole computer system I had to learn. So it took a while for me to get up to a point where I had studied enough stuff and learned how to do enough things to where I was thinking, okay, I could probably start doing some of these projects. But by the time I got to that point, then I started doing the touring of my dad's music and did that for 14 years. So I didn't end up doing any film scoring, but now I have this studio that's built to do anything. It's built to do recording, film scoring, mixing in Atmos, all kinds of experimental recording, 3D recording. Mm-hmm. So that is a culmination of years and years of research, studying, practicing, trying different things. And it's still an ongoing process because I always think of anything that I do with music as just being a student of it all. I never think of like, oh, I finally figured this out. I got it. It's always like, I don't know if this is going to work, but let's see what happens. Boing, you know. So
Saw this in a cartoon once.
yeah.
That's great. Well, and then, yeah, you've been training yourself and teaching. You've created your own producing school over the years. You know.
Well, pretty much. I mean, one of the biggest training tools was my dad's music, because when you learn to first learn the music by listening and hearing how it's all put together and learning how it was arranged, that becomes very integral to your knowledge of music production. Because if you learn the songs and the way the instruments go together, you start to see which frequency ranges everything sits in so that you can hear the music properly. If you recreate that while you're learning the songs, it makes it easier for the front of the house mixer to be able to make it sound good for the audience, because you have the instrumentation in the right frequency ranges.
Yeah.
If you learn the parts, but you gave it a different sound, now they don't necessarily fit together the way they're supposed to. So that was a big part of the learning of not only how to play the music, but how to make it sound like what it should sound like, not only on stage, but in a recording after the fact. So if you're doing that 100 shows a year, 6 months out of the year for 14 years straight, you're going to learn a few things. Yeah, and during that time also, I was asked to do an orchestral piece of music that was for a concert in Holland, where a 100-piece orchestra, the NNO Orchestra in Amsterdam, they had said, hey, would you be interested to write a piece of music and have it performed, and then have other music of your dad's and even a piece of Steve Vai's music performed at a concert? So I thought that would be a great thing to do. It'd be really fun. Yeah. But I was also terrified because I'd never written for orchestra before. I had worked with a computer to make orchestral sounds, but it's very different than using an actual orchestra and a conductor.
Did they think that you knew how to do it because they assumed because your dad could do it?
I think they thought maybe I would have some idea of, you know, how to get it done. And the thing is, I knew people that would be able to actually take whatever I wrote and properly have it represented on the page. Because if I'm writing for an instrument like an oboe, and I've never played an oboe and I don't know what the range of it is, I might put a note just outside the range in a melody, but somebody that knows all that stuff and the notation, they would see that and go, no, that note up here has to be played down here because it's beyond the range of what the instrument can play. But meanwhile, if you're using a computer, you can make instruments play beyond their range. And so that's a whole other thing, is that you might get used to a certain sound on a computer, but in real life, it can never sound that way. And that's one of the things that my dad did in recording sessions anyway. So you take a song like Peaches on Regalia as an example, he would record horns and clarinets and different woodwinds and things at different speeds on the tape, so that when they were played back at the right speed, they would be in a range that was impossible to be performed. So he was in fact creating new instruments and new textures by doing that. So he did a lot of tape speed manipulation recording that made stuff sound incredible. And if you take those things out of that recording, the vibe and the whole personality of that song is not there. So he really was doing things that were very experimental. So for me to learn how to write for the orchestra, I could only do it by just jumping in, you know. And I ended up writing a couple of pieces. One of them was a 14-minute piece called The Adventures of Dindu, which I hope to be able to actually mix in Atmos and release at some time next year, because it's a cool piece of music. And I want to get the feeling of being surrounded by all these things and have it's almost like pixelation. If you've ever seen a piece of art and it gets zoomed in and you see like all the little dots.
Oh, okay.
That kind of stuff. When you see that, if you imagine music that way, where, okay, a part of a piece of music, it starts here, but it moves to the next instrument and the next note in that scale is picked up by another instrument, that stuff moves around on stage, and it has this natural, interesting quality when you're standing there. But in a stereo mix, you can't feel it move around like if you were standing in the room. But in Atmos, you can. And that's the thing that I want to do, is I want to be able to recreate that three-dimensional feeling.
Are you going to be able to create that for even cheaper, for the cheaper seats, referring to cheaper headphones? You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's the thing, is that just a regular pair of headphones. So in Atmos, the thing that is interesting about Atmos, and it's going to get better and better over time, is when you are in a room with the speakers, that's going to be your best overall immersive experience. But the majority of people are going to hear Atmos just in headphones. And there's two different things that are going to happen. In a headphone mix, just regular headphones, it takes all the speaker options and it puts it into a binaural stereo headphone mix. So what that ends up meaning is that you have extended range, so you can hear behind you and in front of you. You get this spatial perception in regular headphones. You get less of the up and over your head that you would if you were in a room with speakers that had that. But you do get a sense that there's some height, but you definitely get more of a sense that there's front and back. And so that alone gives any song that's ever been mixed in stereo, if you mix it in Atmos and you put on headphones, you're going to hear more than you ever heard. Reverbs, instruments, all that stuff. So it really does expand the feeling that you get from the music. It's much more immersive. Clearly the best is if you hear it in a room with properly tuned speakers and all that stuff.
Right. I mean, because that's the example. So sorry, in the podcast talking about, you know, the Eddie mixes. You hear like one speaker, I think it was Blues was talking about, one speaker would be Eddie, another speaker would be, you know, that's how you could hear things, was right and left. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that was it. There was no other, to break it down, those are your two choices. Center or right or left.
Right. Which is always going to be the case in probably most music that we'll ever hear, because we're so used to hearing something where even in stereo, you have a phantom center. But in a surround environment, if you have stuff that's on either side, there's no phantom center. You have stuff that is getting to you from left to right. It's very specifically left or right. Not like when something's in front of you, left and right, where you then perceive that phantom center.
Yeah.
So what you have when you have that sound, that you're in this like circle or this bubble, once it goes to just this binaural stereo thing, you do get a little sense of that circle in front of you and a little bit behind you that's more natural to your actual way that you hear things. So it's going to give a new perspective to any kind of music. And that's why there's a big push for every song that's ever been recorded in mono or stereo to suddenly become an Atmos thing that's streamable on Apple or Amazon or Spotify or Tidal. You know, everybody's working towards getting every song in the world put into that format, because it is more immersive. And you do, if you're somebody that really is attached to music for emotional content, you're going to feel it even more with a good Atmos mix.
It's gonna be, I can imagine when you first hear it, it's gonna be trippy to get used to it. But then once you get used to it, you're not gonna go back and listen to the other stuff, because you'll be like, you know.
It's true. It will give you more than what you have been used to. But the thing that is even more interesting than taking something that already existed in stereo and turning it into this other experience is to now consider writing music that is already built to be in that space. So if you have a vocal idea that you want to come up and over your head, you can be thinking of that when you are already writing that, so that it's not a trick that you've added on later. It's part of the song. It's part of how you experience it the very first time you hear that song. So that's a different thing, because when you start making stuff and the experience that you hear the very first time, the way you connect to that music, if it has all these elements to it, that's going to be a whole different experience. It'll be similar to what happened when things went from mono to stereo, but there's just a lot more that you can get from it, because there's all this other real estate with all the speakers and stuff. So it's it's really interesting because you can do really cool things to recreate the space that you're recording in. You can make it very, very much a sensory experience. Like, oh, wow, I really am in the room with these people playing this at this time. And that's the part that's going to be really cool when it starts becoming a recording process that is sort of indigenous to the song from the beginning.
That's gonna be awesome. That is
Yeah.
so awesome. So exciting. All right. So as I was talking, we got this whole thing. You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch. Kind of a little offbeat in the album, kind of a Christmassy. I thought it was a soundtrack song actually at one point. I'm like, is this supposed to go somewhere like a soundtrack or what?
Well, the thing was, they were making the movie The Grinch, and I had
Okay.
always loved the original song, but I
Right.
thought, well, if I make a demo of this, maybe I could get it sent in time, and maybe they would use it in the movie. Didn't end up happening, but it was still a fun thing to have, where it was a good challenge, and I added a riff into it that made it like a metal song or a bluesy hard rock song.
Like I know.
Yeah, that wasn't in the original. But I did end up playing the song live on Conan O'Brien. And that was interesting that we got to do that. But it was a really fun experiment to do, because that was a tricky thing to transcribe, all the parts, the violin parts, the horn parts, all that stuff. And again, that was using the Orban parametric EQ to really dial in that stuff. But the solo has this kind of Octavia sound, but I actually played my dad's Baby Snakes SG, which has a built-in thing called a green ringer, which is kind of an octave effect that's a distortion at the same time. And that's the sound that you hear that has this really angry kind of octave sound on there.
I think it's so great. I can't believe they wouldn't use it. It sounds, it honors the song, but then when it rocks out, kind of steps up just a little bit more.
Yeah, I thought it was a fun version. It's still, I think, a fun version to listen to.
Their loss. All right, track 5, Therapy.
So Therapy is one of these things where I had some extra time on the end of an analog reel when we were doing the Shampoo horn record. And Terry Bozzio was tracking a few songs that day, and we had just a little bit of time to record and let the reel run out. So it was just a complete improvisation. And I added a couple of overdubs after the improvised part, but you hear the tape actually run out. So the end of the song is the reel of tape just stopping.
That's great. So that's really a carryover, because when was Shampoo horn done? Like right before this?
I don't know. Was it like early 90s, 90, 91, something like that?
Yeah, that's going to be a weak spot for me. I'll have to go back and revisit that. We'll have to, that'll be in the future.
Something like that. But speaking of Shampoo horn, when I did that thing in Holland with the orchestra, we actually played the song Shampoo horn. We did an orchestral arrangement, and I played guitar with the orchestra, and that was one of the songs. And that was cool to hear that fleshed out and turned into an orchestral piece.
I can imagine you didn't think of that when you guys was it AZDZ.
Yeah, back in the day, I wasn't thinking about it as an orchestral piece, but it is a cool way to hear it.
I can imagine. 12-string thing.
So 12-string thing was, I was working with Warren DeMartini from Rat. He made a record that I ended up helping him with by recording some things and kind of co-producing this record, which was called Crazy Enough to Sing to You. And at the time that we were working on that, he had this white or like a cream colored 12-string acoustic guitar, and I was at his house and I just plugged it in. I think he had it. I think there was one mic in the room and there was a DAT machine running, and I just improvised something on this 12-string. There was no click track or anything. And I basically mostly played whatever it was on one string. And then I said, oh, there's something to this thing. So I later took it home, and then I worked out other things to go with it. I played along to it, and then I added a drummer after I had most of the other stuff put on there. So there was no click track. It was just all just kind of like this push and pull feel, but it became something that, you know, you would think that we played it all at the same time, like it was written to be this thing, but it really, the drums were the last thing put on it.
So that literally playing one note, a couple notes on one string was kind of like your scratch track, your guideline.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. So with that is fantastic though. That's another good one.
And it ended up having this kind of almost, there was a solo that had a tapping thing in it it reminded me of Xanadu. There's a real kind of Xanadu kind of melody thing that happens with it. But most of the electric guitars were played on a Telecaster. And I remember I did a thing where I had these D88s. So if I did a part, the next part, if I wanted to double it, I would change the speed of the DA88 machine so that it was out of tune to the other part. So I would get this sort of natural,
out of phase. Like,
yeah, just a different chorusing effect because it was slightly, you know, a couple cents out of tune to the other one. And that was how that sound happened.
That is super creative too. That's well, like your dad, you know. Do you get excited when you come up with these little concepts? I imagine when you're like, oh.
Well, yeah, it's one of those things where if you get an idea and you have a chance to fully explore it and you get some good results, it just keeps you thinking, like the next time some other idea comes up, you go, okay, great. It's going to be worth putting the time in to see what that can be. So I've learned a lot from those kind of experiments. And when I have had the opportunity to have a recording space of my own where I wasn't worried about being on the clock, that's even better because you can extend that experimental time to a few days or a few weeks if you had to. But if you were in a studio, you might not have the luxury of doing that. You would probably be like, well, I have 2 hours I can kind of goof with, but then I have to get back to the main thing.
Well, yeah, now with your own studio, you can do things like your dad came up with, you know, the speeds and the changing and creating. It's
I've got a lot of things happening in my studio that can't be done in other studios. It's a pretty advanced setup. I have a router that controls my ability to access the analog equipment. So it has 512 IO, and that's a lot because there's a lot of gear in there.
Right.
But I can make digital presets or templates of how things are passed to each other. And I can store those and recall them and change them at any time. But that was really never possible before. And now it is, where you have access to actual analog stuff where you're turning knobs, but you can go to the computer app and say, I want these 10 things to go to this track and these 5 things to go to this track. And you just kind of dial it up and then store it. And then anytime you want that same sound, let's say that's your favorite drum sound, you know, you have a preset for your favorite drum sound. And now all that stuff is patched in. You can really move quickly. So it's, there's a lot of cool things that can be done in the studio.
Just the fact you don't have to do regular patching is awesome itself.
Well, I still have to do regular patching because there's a lot of gear in here and I couldn't fit it all into this one router. But I left most of the mic pre stuff to be on the patch, on the other physical patch bays, because you know that stuff may change from time to time. But or you can leave certain stuff like, I always use my drums going through the Neve or whatever, you know.
Right. Fantastic. That's a little side note there. Your studio. Excellent. Secret Hedges.
So Michael Hedges was one of my favorite guitar players, and he was a friend of mine. And I always loved how he played with these different tunings. And he had this amazing timing and feel to what he did, which I could never even think of doing anything close to what he did. Yeah. But my sort of tribute to that style of playing and tribute to him was I tuned a guitar to a chord, which I had no idea what it was. Mm-hmm. And I just randomly like would tune the strings and I would play and go, okay, this sounds like this will be an interesting chord. And then I just set myself in front of a microphone and hit record and played whatever came to mind. And so I completely improvised that piece that's called Secret Hedges. The acoustic part was played on an acoustic guitar that my dad had, which I'm pretty sure is the guitar he played Sleep Dirt on. It was this Martin acoustic and a steel string. So the main part is just improvised. And then I added a couple of overdubs. You hear a 12-string overdub, you hear a keyboard overdub that has these, it's like a thing called a tambura, like an Asian sounding drone.
That Middle Eastern
a couple of, I think there's a little bit of fretless guitar with the Sustainiac on there as well. But the main thing is this acoustic guitar, which I also ran through an old Eventide H949. So it had a little harmonizer and a little slapback. So there's a few things going on in that, but the main thing was I played something from top to bottom without ever having played on that tuning. And that was the goal, was to say, what happens if you play something and you just capture the first thing that comes to mind? So it's a completely improvised thing that I would never be able to play again because I have no idea what it was. I don't even know what the tuning is. So
have you ever played anything just normal? Like literally just out of the box and plugged in like crazy?
Yeah.
I mean,
there's lots of times when I'll do that, but you know, it's fun to try other things just to see what will happen. And that was one of those cool experiments.
No, I mean, that's what makes your album so much fun and much more different than everybody else's is you're much more creative and trying different tunings and everything else. And
well, I mean, somebody might hear that and think it's all normal tuning and be like, how is he playing that? And, you know, even if that was the case, I would hear it and think, I don't know what's going on there. There's so much weirdness happening with that because the feel changes because I'm just hearing what I'm playing as I'm playing it with no preconceived notion of what the thing is.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's the whole thing with this series we're doing. To me, it's a gift of anyone who can hear this. We're listening to it because I'm going back and I'm re-listening to these, and every time I'm hearing something different now. You know.
Yeah,
it's a whole new view on them. You know, so
that's good. I mean, most people didn't really hear these records much to begin with, but if they have heard them and now they have a new perspective, maybe it's fun to go back and check them out.
Well, there are those of us, and this will be on your site, so it's a dedicated bunch of us. How about Habanera?
So that's one of the pieces that is, I was aware of that piece of music from the Bad News Bears. And I always loved what was happening. You know, you could see all the failures of these kids making all these errors on the baseball field and being dejected. But then there's this, you know, sense that they're going to get it all together. And Tatum O'Neal and the kid, you know, who played Kelly Leak, who was like, if the ball was hit anywhere, he'd run from center field to get it at second base or whatever. You know, he was all that stuff. I was so into baseball at that time. What I used to do when I was 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, I would take a bag of baseballs, and there was a big railroad tie that was in the backyard, and it was on the ground, but it got stood up and it was put into the ground with concrete. And on one side, there was a basketball hoop that was stuck to this big railroad tie. Mm-hmm. And on the back side of that, there was a bucket that used to have plaster or something in it. But with a nail gun, we nail gunned it straight to the back of this railroad tie in the exact strike zone for if you were going to throw to a catcher. So I would go like 60 yards back and I would throw baseballs into this bucket. And if I hit it in the center of the bucket, the ball would hit there and bounce back to me. Now on either side, there was no net, there was nothing. So if you missed, you had to go find the ball. So I got to be pretty good at throwing the ball into this bucket. And that's what I would do for hours a day. And I ended up pitching a no-hitter at 12 years old, which was pretty funny. But that's the stuff that I used to do up until I heard Van Halen. I was like, okay, something's about to change here, you know?
Well, that's quite a focus that I have to keep throwing balls for hours and hours and hours. So
Yeah, I
I should-
loved it though. I was into it. I was way into baseball at that time, and I used to watch all the games that were on TV. Like I used to love it when there were day games on WGN, the Chicago station, because they would play the daytime Cub games from Wrigley Field. And I
Mhm.
would just love to see all that, come home from school, or even if I was home from school because I was sick or something, TV would be like, oh, you get to watch I Dream of Jeannie,
Yep.
Gomer Pyle, the Brady Bunch, and a bunch of other things, and then baseball. So I was like, this is the best.
Well, that focus has always been carried over clearly in your guitar playing there and your music. So
Yeah.
you center focused, one mind.
Well, if I got into something, I like to learn what it was about and then try to figure out how I could do that, but then also what it could do under my own circumstances. Like how, if I wanted to change something or use that as an influence, where was it going to go from there? And that's always been an interesting thing to try to work out in my own guitar playing.
It does feel like you do that.
Even the other day, I picked up the guitar for the first time in months, and I played something, and it was this really simple thing. And I realized I had never, ever tried it before. And I was like, how is it that I've never tried playing this after all these years? And it was just, every so often, I'll have one of those moments where I'll just realize that after all these years of playing things, there will be something new that happens. But this was something that was so simple and so specifically simple that I was like, why have I never done this before? And I would have to get a guitar, which I could do. I could just grab one right now and show you what it is. Because it's, I'll just do it. Hold on. I wanted to play, like a bent note, like something like this. I'm going from this note and I'm holding this note at the same time. So, but I would be bending. So that I had done before, but what I hadn't done before was to start with this note here and then not start here, but start here and bend from here, which is different than, so I was just doing this half step bend.
I like that.
Thinking, wait a minute, there's a few of those that I could do in other spots, like, and then I was like, why haven't I done that before? I could get some cool things out of that. I can make the guitar sound super drunk, and it's just little things like that that then start a whole new idea for what could be possible for other things, and then I ended up playing guitar for about 15 or 20 minutes, looking for all these places where I could do half step bends and have another note that stayed stable while the other one was being bent. So just stuff like that happens every now and again.
And the fact that you actually picked up the guitar again too is just good news unto itself.
Yeah, well, I mean, I barely played at all, and the stuff that becomes just natural things that I would play are, just stuff that is, like stuff like this. I'm so out of playing, but then I start playing stuff like that where it's like these kind of, how many things can I get with downstrokes and pull-offs and all these kind of little moves. That stuff becomes like a natural part of my playing now, where in the past I would have had to think hard about, well, what do I want to do with stuff like that? So it's weird what has stuck as part of a new vocabulary, even after not playing for, the majority of this entire time that we've had this pandemic stuff going on. I haven't even touched the guitar. I mean, I've probably played less than 3 weeks of guitar time since since the
That's
pandemic.
crazy. It's got to be some muscle memory. I mean, when you started playing your dad's stuff, you really had to step outside of how you thought and become a different player and look at things totally different, which has got to expand your. That's got to be where you really start to just build to the point where you can just kind of jump into stuff now. And
Yeah, I mean, that's my approach with the music, was to be able to play the music where, when it needed to be very specific and be played exactly as written, I wanted to be able to do that. But I also, where there was room to do improvisation, I wanted to be able to play in a way that was, I could infuse it with my own playing, but I could also use the vocabulary that I learned of my dad's style so that I could fuse the two. And in doing that, I learned a lot of new rhythmic ideas. I learned a lot more scales, and I had more colors to be able to superimpose different things over chord progressions and stuff like that I never knew anything about, which ultimately ended up helping me a lot when I wrote that piece for the orchestra.
right.
So all these little bits, they've filtered in over the years. But I would say now, more than ever, I might have a little bit of a style in my own playing that somebody could point out and go, oh, yeah, that's a Dweezil Zappa thing that's unique to him, where I don't think I really had that, 20 or 30 years ago.
I think in your last album, I kind of felt like you kind of had your own style. That's really everything kind of, I feel like, is coming together with everything you've been doing.
Yeah, but it's a weird thing because some players get that style straight out of the gate. Somebody like Edward Van Halen or somebody like Derek Trucks.
Yeah.
They just have a voice of what they do, and it's natural to them. Jimi Hendrix, it's just, when it's so natural to that person, it's there from the beginning, and they just keep doing what's natural to them. But I've always been sort of a student of everything, and I learned different bits and pieces, and I keep trying to put them together in different ways. So if you listen to my playing from song to song or record to record, it changes drastically every time.
I agree. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Your last album sounds a lot more to the stuff you've been doing. It really seems like you've really stayed on track now. Changes, but
it has, by the time I got to Via Zamata, it had coalesced into something that had some of my own language, because I had done so much touring already at that point. So I think that's where it kind of,
it might just be the song structure. To me, when I hear it, it just feels like it's that solid piece from it,
Yeah. Well, it's years of experience that finally, at that point in time, that was 2016 when I made that.
Yeah.
So it's been a while. If I made a record now, it would be drastically different from that. But there would be, I think, some things that would still be hangovers, some noticeable similarities.
Oh, yeah. In your defense of finding your style, you name a few greats that did it. Most people that find their style, find a sound early on, you don't hear them because they're not really good sound. You kept learning and growing and trying stuff,
Well, I think there's a few players that continue to evolve. Jeff Beck is a player that evolved pretty drastically over time, and he plays better now than he ever played. So you see it kind of the opposite with other players sometimes, where they have a really exciting peak, and then there's an expectation that they have to keep going from there, and maybe they don't have any more gas in the tank. So then it starts going the other side, and there's examples of that you can point to with certain people's playing. But I think it's whatever you're inspired to keep doing. If you really love the instrument, you're going to keep looking for new ways to do stuff, new sounds, new styles of playing. The funny thing is, for me, I think the more I get into it, the more it's about a specific type of phrasing, using less notes, trying to be able to say, I want someone to get this kind of a feeling. Whereas in the earlier days, it's about building technique and being able to say, oh, I want to be able to play that. I want to be able to incorporate these techniques. I want to blend these techniques. And then when you finally find a way to use them all and you can speak with them without having to think about it too hard, that's when it kind of comes together. And that took years and years and years for me to get that. But like I said, some of these other people, they already just knew that they wanted to achieve that goal. I want people to feel something when they hear my music, and I'm going to play this way and make it happen. And so it's not an easy thing to do. And some people do it right out of the gate and some people don't.
Number 9, the Bullfighter song.
Yeah, Le Toreador. So Habanera and Le Toreador both are classical pieces from the Carmen opera. And that is, again, Bad News Bears. I wanted to learn all of these pieces and do it all on the guitar. Again, there's no bass. It's guitar with an octave pedal when you hear the low stuff. But that was a real challenge to be able to learn how to get these parts recorded, because the thing for me was I didn't have the ability to learn a whole part, play it as a single pass, and then say, okay, now I'm going to learn the next part and play that as a single pass. When I was transcribing the stuff, it's like doing a jigsaw puzzle. I'm moving incrementally in small parts. I'm going to be like, all right, if there's 8 parts, I'm going to learn this one, this one, this one. They're all stacked on each other. And if I only learn 4 notes from what's happening in that little section, I've at least learned all 4 notes for all those parts. And I have that much, this little sliver. Now I got to move to the next sliver. And I did it that way, where I was building like, okay, I can learn 3 or 4 notes and play that. And then the next 3 or 4 notes from the next part and the next and the next. And that's, and I would write down which EQs I was using to get certain sounds. And
that sounds so tedious.
Yeah.
That was really tedious.
Yeah, it is. It is a tedious way to do it, but that was the only way I could figure out how to do it.
How long did it take you to break down like that? It seems like
a few weeks.
It does feel like an arduous task.
Painstaking. Yeah. I did the same with Hawaii Five-0 and the Grinch. They were all done like that.
That's rough.
Yeah, but it turned out good.
No, it's a good, but it's also like probably your most guitar non-vocal album too. You've done
that one, and Go With What You Know, because that's pretty much all
guitar. Miss Reynolds. But this was a lot just you playing and guitar, and besides that one vocal. Shnook?
So Shnook, when I was rehearsing, we used to have a place we rehearsed called Joe's Garage, which was this building in the valley in North Hollywood, California. And there were a few rehearsal rooms in there. And certain times a day, you might get bad radio frequencies that would compete with your amplification. So the noise that you hear of the guy saying, the biggest schnook in all of show business, blah, 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 whatever he says, that was coming through my guitar amp. So we had pressed record, and I just was like, well, let's see what happens when we get some radio signal, and then we'll just start playing. So you hear this thing happen, and then we just start playing. And that's just an improv piece of music where there was nothing ever rehearsed. It was another one where we had to run out the rest of the reel. We had some time. And that guitar was a chartreuse sparkle baritone Stratocaster shaped guitar that had a bass string for the low E string. It was like a 75 or something. That was the bass string. And I tuned the guitar to be, the low string was an octave below E, just like a bass would be. And then the rest of the guitar was tuned like a normal guitar, but the guitar neck was longer than a normal guitar neck. So it was a very strange guitar, and the tension was weird, but you'll hear the low notes that happen that's because it has a bass string for the low E.
And that was because you did it obviously for the experimenting, right? I mean, that's an interesting setup, and the
Yeah,
long
but I
neck
used
is
that
going to be
same
hard.
guitar. I had a song that I wrote called Did I Mention It Was Huge? And that was the guitar that I used for that riff. And that one, it was a really cool guitar. I ended up selling it a couple years back. Somebody has it now, but it's a unique instrument.
Sounds it. So number 11 is more of a talking part, which Dick Simmons' Office, which
Right.
each time I hear it, it's funnier and funnier. And I don't know why. Just like I don't know.
So I used to play a lot of golf, and I had these different tees that would have different names on them. And I thought it was kind of funny because sometimes you'd go up to a tee box and there'd be some extra tees there, and you might pick them up and put them in your pocket, and they might have a business name or somebody's name on them. So I had a lot of different tees with different names. So I had some Gary Coleman, I had Chuck Norris, I had what's the guy? Because I had guitar picks with these names too. So like there was, another one was Dr. Huxtable, but then I had one that I made that was just Dick Cinnamon. So I imagined that this would be like some guy that was like an accountant or something. And so we would joke about this guy, Dick Cinnamon. But at the time, I was in a relationship with Lisa Loeb, and we were working on some music, and we had been joking about having to get Dick Cinnamon's approval on something. So it became this thing where it's like, well, let's call Dick Cinnamon. Let's actually make a phone call to Dick Cinnamon's office. Let's see if we can get him on the phone. And so she played the secretary, and I was just calling Dick Cinnamon to see if I could get him on the phone. And it was that thing of the timing that could frustrate you so bad when you're put on hold and somebody asks if you can be put on hold, and then they put you on hold before you can even reply. And so it was like, how can we recreate that feeling of what would frustrate you the most while you're trying to respond to somebody and they just interrupt you, and you're like, how could Dick Cinnamon be so fucking busy, you know? And that's the thing, you know. So,
oh, it's pretty funny.
Then we recorded it, and I said, but we have to have hold music. We have to have terrible hold music. So then I recorded this really bad hold music, which was filtered to sound like it was coming through a phone. So that was just the whole excuse, really, was to be able to write bad hold music.
That is like, so as the kids would say, meta, like on so many levels.
Yeah.
Just starting from like your picks and a fake name to go that many levels in.
Yeah. Because, you know, if you just hear it, you're like, what is this? Who cares? But if you have the backstory, then it's kind of fun.
Well, it's still fun. I actually thought it was funny not even knowing that for some reason. Like, I just hear you get aggravated. I'm like, you can relate to it. And it just seems funnier each time. I don't know why. The backstory makes it even better.
Yep.
So you do end the album on a ripping note with Purple Guitar.
Right. So Purple Guitar was a piece of music that we used to play live, and it used a little guitar. It was about, I don't know, about this big. And it was tuned up to F sharp, I think, but the low E string was like a drop D tuning. So it was tuned down. But the guitar would allow for certain things to happen that it just had a personality to it. And I wrote this song that the joke of the song was that there's a simple riff, and in between the riff, there's going to be a lick that gets played. And each time the lick gets longer and longer till it's almost a complete guitar solo. And the whatever is being played is orchestrated so that the drums are really going along with the rhythms of whatever the guitar's doing. So you have this simple riff, and then you have a lick, and then the riff comes back, and then you have a lick that's now a little bigger, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing in between. And we used to play that song, and it kept growing over time because I kept adding parts to it. And by the time we got into the studio to record it, then there were actually some overdubs that got added to add little harmonies or things like that. But it's actually not the greatest performance of that song. We used to play it better live, but that was just a studio version of it. But I remember my dad came to see us play, and he loved that song. He said, you should always open with that song, and you might even want to close with it and play it again. So it was,
wow.
We usually closed with it, but he just loved that song.
That's pretty fun. Opening and closing with it. That's like I had a hit single and doing that.
Yeah,
it's great.
It could be arranged so that you could play it.
Yeah, intro and outros and stuff.
Yeah, but it was thematic. It had a lot of things going on in it. One day, maybe I'll do a new version of it because it would be cool to experiment with it in Atmos.
Right. Did you have any live stuff of it too recorded out there somewhere?
Not multi-track. We have versions of it where it was recorded to a DAT machine.
Yeah.
So I could maybe explore one of those and see if there's a decent recording of it. But it was a pretty hard song to remember. There's a lot in it.
Well, you guys were good. Even when you guys were doing the other songs, you guys would do melodies and half hour of songs too when you guys were playing out,
Yeah, we would put together crazy medleys of things where it was a lot of different songs that were well known, but we would make them get connected in weird ways. And at one point we were doing something that was kind of funny where we would just take artists that shouldn't be together and put them into the name of the band and then like play some of their music as if they got together to do something. So one of them that was funny was Crosby, Stills, and Prince. It was like no reason for them to be in a band together. And so like, ladies and gentlemen, the latest single from Crosby, Stills, and Prince. And then we would play something that had a bit of all of their music mashed up, And another one we did like that was Nelson Phillips, so it was like Wilson Phillips with Nelson. Yeah. So there was a few things like that. I remember there was MC Hammer. What was it? It was like something with CNC Music Factory along with it. Oh, REMC Hammer, REMCNC Hammer Music Factory or something like that. So we would blend all these things together. We were just making dumb jokes with that because nobody knew our music. So when we would play shows, we'd play our songs and then we'd throw in these things that nobody would ever know about, but they were always mashups long before there were mashups.
Right. That's what I was going to say. You guys were the originators of doing some of the hilarious mashups, Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. You layering is something, you had been doing prior to this. So it made sense to hear this on the album.
Yeah.
The one thing I would say is last thing on this album is it was done. You actually produced this one yourself, which is the lead, right? It was all you. Flavored Nations, it was on a Steve Vai's label?
Yeah, Steve Vai released it. It came out on his label. But yeah, I had just been collecting some songs, putting them together. I was learning engineering. I was just saying, all right, here's what I can do at this point in time. I recorded that stuff, mixed that stuff, and that became the record.
Well, that's why it's an interesting footnote, because as we've talked about these albums, you've had different producers and then you were assisting in doing this and different labels you've changed around. Right. So to see you kind of moving up your own ladder there, Yeah,
and that was a lot of good stuff that I learned. If I had all those songs in front of me, I would work on them very differently now than I would have back then. But that's the interesting thing about music is there's so many different ways that you can get a similar result, even if you, different equipment works different ways, different techniques, all these things. You can get almost to the same point, but from a completely different mindset, but there's things that I know that I could definitely do better because I understand how to use equipment better. Back then, it was really like, I don't know, does this sound good? Well, it sounds good enough.
It sounds good, so don't even think about going back and changing it because you have so many other things to do.
Yeah.
It sounds good. Don't even think about you can change it. You can't. It's fine. Let the past be. It's a good album.
Yeah, I'm not going to do anything to those right now.
It's a timestamp. Leave it.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you. This has been awesome. We're wrapping up towards the end of all your solo albums, at least so far.
Yeah,
Next
well,
one,
I don't even remember what else we have. We might have one or two. Yeah,
one.
Zamata, is that the last one that we're
Yeah.
supposed to talk about?
That's the last one
Yeah,
of these solo ones. So I want to
cool.
thank you. And we'll be back.
Sounds good. Well, hopefully people will enjoy learning the backstory for this record and all the other ones.